brothers and sisters, Dr. William Barber.
I'm so thankful, first of all, to Brother Youssef. I'm old enough now to say I remember him when, to call and invite us to come, and of course to his father and many of our fathers in the movement, and our hero and our model in many ways, Reverend Jesse Jackson Jr. And I'm glad to know that he's in the room and is still present with us. I think about when the mighty men of David told David, "Sit right here. We'll do the fighting, but just be in our presence for wisdom." And I'm honored that you all are honoring him in that way. Let me be post haste in just saying that what we see happening now has been 50 some years in the making. And if you've not spent some time studying the white Southern strategy and what their 60-year plan was, and then studying white religious nationalism and what their plan was, there's a new movie out called Bad Faith that every clergy person ought to listen to and have your congregation look at. And it shows the connection between white nationalism and big oil. And if you've not read the book on technocratic feudalism and the PayPal mafia, then you may not really understand all of what we are facing right now. I'm with Repairers of the Breach. We now have about 9,000 clergy in our prophetic council of all different races, creeds, colors, because we believe in this moment we must have a moral fusion coalition of clergy. It can't just be black, can't just be white. It has to be moral fusion. That's what we believe. And we co-anchor the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Reverend Jackson was there at the beginning to ensure that nobody had a lot to say about us doing something that had been 50 years in the rafters waiting to be picked up. And I love him for that. Thank God for him being there in 2018. Got a picture of him and I standing together in DC. We now, after 4 years of organizing, have over 40 coordinating committees around the country. Each one of them has a connection of about 30,000 people, which gives us ability to reach about 1.2 million people when we reach out. Last year, knowing what was coming, we decided to have a massive mobilization in DC, brought together nearly 100,000 people in person and over 5 million online. But more than just having an action in DC, our goal was to attain 12 million poor and low-wage voters in this country who have been infrequent voters. Because when we looked at the data, we found out that there's not a state in this country that's a so-called battleground where poor and low-wage people now today don't represent at least 43% of the electorate. And in the states, other poor and low-wage people represent 30% of the electorate. There's not a state in the country where if 15% of poor and low-wage voters that have not voted would be organized around an agenda that they could not fundamentally shift the voting outcomes in that state. We looked at the fact that it was actually a lie that poor and low-wage people were voting against their own self-interest, especially even whites. And the fact that the majority of poor and low-wage voters, when they voted, were voting for candidates that stood for living wages and health care. But the problem is there was 87 million poor and low-wage voters. Only 57 million voted in 2016, then 2020, and 30 million didn't. And most, if you notice in our presidential debates, in our congressional discussions, even in the news media, you never hear the plight of poor low-wage people lifted up. In fact, in 2021, we pushed to get living wages in the Congress. Bobby Scott and Nancy Pelosi and others, we pushed and pushed and pushed till they got it through the House. It went to the Senate. It was on the Senate floor, and 8 Democrats and all Republicans joined together and defeated the bill, which would have lifted 43% of African Americans out of poverty and would have lifted 35 million people out of poverty and low wages. So all that is going on is not just Trump's fault and MAGA's fault. Sometimes it has been the apathy and the uh, uh, um, abdication of our responsibilities politically that has given MAGA much of their push. Even with all of that, though, um, whether even if you're down south, for instance, in North Carolina, I can talk about that in other places, Georgia, just somewhere in the neighborhood of 8% of poor and low wage voters that haven't voted, being organized around an agenda, can fundamentally shift what is going on. As I said, we were able, and we have now the contacts and numbers for 12 million poor and low wage voters that we were able to touch. But as you know, even in the campaign, there was not one debate that focused on, if you become president, what will be your plan for the 140 million poor and low wage people in this country? 43% of our adults, 51% of our children. Instead, the debate was around the wealthy and the middle class. And the very group, we did a study, Yusef, with Columbia University and Howard and Harvard, that analyzed this question: why is it that poor and low wage voters are 30 million of them are not voting? Why is it? What's going on? The number one reason, whether it's in East Kentucky, in the mountains of Kentucky, where we have been and spent a lot of time, or if it's down in the Delta of Mississippi, whether it's in the Bronx, New York, or into Tenderloin in San Francisco, where we've been, the number one answer was nobody talks to us. Nobody talks to us. And then they said, not even the church, because the Pew Foundation did a study of 50,000 sermons and found out that the number one issue on the lips of Jesus, preaching good news to the poor, only registered less than 0.5% of the time in sermons in American pulpits. That 99.5% of the time, the thing that Jesus majored in is not even talked about in the pulpits of America. So, Father Flagger, you're exactly right. And so, as Celinda Lake says, and Reverend Jackson knows Celinda Lake, she's one of the greatest posters and studiers of this stuff. She has said to us that any political force, any political party that does not have a deliberate outreach to poor and low wage people in policy, not just in pandering them, but literally have policies, is in fact committing political suicide and is keeping the ground tilled for demagogues and despots and wannabe kings to be in office. And so what we have is, for those that want to talk about what happened in November, and I don't want to move to one final thing, is they say, well, they blame white women or they blame Hispanic men or so forth and so on. We've done and pulled, several scholars have done analysis. The truth of the matter is, as Dr. King did when he talked about who was to blame for the 4 girls being killed in Birmingham, he laid out everybody. He even included black preachers that weren't engaged. He talked about white sheriffs. He laid out everybody. The truth is, when you look at the analysis, nobody did their full due diligence. And the fact is, this last year was the first election where poor and low wage voters voted 1% higher for the Republican candidate than they did the Democrat. In beforehand, those that did vote at least voted in the majority for the more quote unquote progressive candidate. Now, if folk are saying nobody's reaching them, and when I've sat with coal miners, black and white, in East Kentucky, that's their message as well. And we know that what we have is an election that took place where the person that won didn't really win as much as the battlefield was not full of all of the people that could have been on it. And we need to study this data. And I don't have time to go into all of it, but Yusef, anytime we want to come up, we've actually have it in 1, 2, 3 form. I can send some of it to you where we've broken it down by states And we know exactly where the precincts are. We know exactly where the numbers are, because that's what we're going to have to do for the long-term action. In this moment that we're in, and I told you, Chef, I wanted to talk some about this. Steve Bannon has a video, and if you've not seen it, I would encourage you all to look at it, that actually lays out what MAGA strategy is and what the PayPal mafia and the technocrats are really about. PayPal mafia is Musk and those others that you mentioned earlier, and what their strategy is. Now, I want to give you 4 points. That's what I wanted to bring this morning, and then suggest that only a fusion type coalition, a rainbow, if you will, a fusion, if you will, a moral fusion that challenges them not based on party. But when Cory Booker said the other day, some things are not about Democrat versus Republican, but left versus right, or but right versus wrong, he was quoting from the message of our movement that we were talking about in 2017. That there has to be a moral penetration of all of the immoral things that are going on. But here is, there goes. This is Steve Bannon. He said, we told the president to give us 100 days of thunder. Use the executive orders to create chaos. Write any executive order up you want to write up. Do anything you want to do, knowing that executive orders do not carry the weight of law. But the goal of the constant throwing out of executive order is to keep the news and the ground shifting so that people can't build a movement, because every other day you give them something else to chase. That's number one. He said that was an intentional strategy. Number two, he said their strategy was precinct strategy. It was not that when they say he want a mandate, what they mean is he want a mandate of all the precincts, and they watered their they brought their uh, electoral strategy all the way down to a precinct level. They never had a popular vote strategy. They've always had an electoral college strategy, always. And they believed that they would always start with uh, at least 15 states to their good, because they would always be able to control the former Confederate states plus Nevada and Arizona. And that's their strategy. And if they did that, they could always control a minimum of 33% of the Senate and a minimum of about 40% of the Congress. And they would start out with 172 electoral college votes to the good just from those 15 states, meaning they only had to win 98 electoral colleges from the other 35 states. This is their strategy. Number two, they said that their strategy was to put the pedal to the metal and overrun Democrats in the Senate who they believe didn't have the energy anymore to fight them and to provide a resistance. He said in this video, we expect resistance to come, but we felt like we could do this in the first 130 days. Now, what did they want to do in the first 130 days? The technocrats who believe in technocratic feudalism believe that what they need is a president who's like a king in just in face value. But you create so much disorientation, and then you force the government to have to come to the techno folk to try to fix things. And then, like the lords of the feudal system, they parcel out different pieces of the society to them to fix. They do not believe that the masses should be involved in elections. They don't believe they're smart enough. They don't believe they're smart enough. And they believe that they can utilize, so for them, information means more than money. That's why they went after the information. And who knew that one person could give one person access to all of our data? That our data was less protected than a nuclear weapon. Who knew that? They knew it. And so here's their goal. Number one, Steve Bannon said, they want to control 4,000 federal workers. Now they're firing all these workers, but their goal is to control 4,000 federal workers, the managers that oversee the 10 million federal workers. And if they can control and replace the 4,000, then they believe that they have taken over, if you will, the government. They want to fire all of these federal workers under the guise in the community that federal means black and brown people who've gotten access in federal jobs that they wouldn't have otherwise. But they want to fire as many as they can because the goal of Musk and them is to make everything have to run by AI and technology anyway. Number two, they want control of the $5 trillion budget. They want to control it. They want to give $2 trillion of it in tax breaks. They want to control it, and they want to pass a budget that is 10 years long. Why? Because in 2035, the country in America, for the first time in the Western Hemisphere, will be majority minority, black, brown. And they know they can't stop that. So when they say this might be your last election, in some ways what they mean is this might be the last election that their kind of politics could win popular votes. But if we break the government, if we moved all the money and broken the programs and privatized all of them, they will do to us what was done to Mandela in South Africa. Ask Reverend Jackson how by the time he became president, the systems had so broken down that he didn't even have control of the military when he first became president. That's what's going on here. And they say if we can control this $5 trillion budget, we can then control the $76 trillion of assets that are connected to the $5 trillion budget. And that is why if we're mobilizing, I'm all for a protest of certain things, but if we're not mobilizing on this budget, the Bible says where your heart is, where your treasure is, where your heart is. And if we're not looking at the damage that this budget can do, this budget could be the most unifying piece. That's why every first Monday now, we're mobilizing clergy in full vestments, going inside of the rotunda. They've already told us if we even stop and act like we're praying, they're going to arrest us. And so we're building up and so forth. But we're going in there based on this budget. And we've done a analysis I sent to you, Steph, called the high moral cost of the budget. Inside of that budget that they want to control, they want to cut 36 million people from Medicaid. And they're close now. They want to cut, they want to have provisions in that budget that says no to a living wage. The treasurer, Trump's treasurer, has already said they believe the current minimum wage of $7.25 is too high. And they are totally against raising the minimum wage that hadn't been raised since 2009. If they get their way, that budget will cut Social Security. It will cut 20 free and reduced lunch for 24 million students and force a kind of privatization of that. I want you all to take a look. If Yusef has it and send it to you, we didn't do this analysis for Poor People's Campaign and for repairs of the breach. We did it for the country. I remember when Reverend Jackson used to send out Jack facts because he taught us when I was young, the last thing you want to be in public is loud and wrong. And so we got two of the best think tanks to say, why is it that this budget is there for? We fight, they got all these other EOs, but what you pass in Congress can't go to the court. An EO can be overturned by the court or can be overturned by the Congress. You can't overturn what they're doing in Congress in the court. Why is it that all this noise, but they're focused? Because if they get this budget done the way they want to do it, it's not that you won't be able to put them out of office, but the country will be stuck in a way through a kind of impoverished democracy. And if we are focused everywhere else but on this budget, we're missing it right now. Steve Bannon, the last thing he said, we want we want 4,000 workers. We want the $5 trillion budget that controls $76 trillion in assets, and we want the Justice Department. You know, right? Yesterday, Trump signed an executive order to target some people and directed the Justice Department to go after them. We haven't seen that. They want control of the Justice Department. And the fourth thing Bannon said they wanted was control of the military, which is why in that budget, they are asking for another $98 billion to go into the Pentagon budget, which will bring us to over $1.1 trillion military budget. If you cut that budget in half, America would still have more money in its military, what we call the war economy, than Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and Iraq combined. And the $98 billion that they want to put in there now is enough money to guarantee everybody health care, every child free lunch, so forth and so on. Brothers and sisters, I want to stop there and say this. These are the four things that they have said by their own mouths that they are about, and why they're using this technocratic feudalism to accomplish it. If your enemy or your adversary tells you exactly what they're going to do, and you run and do everything else but challenge that, then Frege said you're an informed idiot. And if you run everywhere else, you're just crazy. So I'm going to encourage you to get that tape. I'll send it to you by Bannon and hear it from their own mouths, right? Listen to it. And then we need to, in a serious way, I believe, around the country, think about how we, in fact, galvanize around this budget and around economic race, because it's neither one, it's both and. And in this particular moment, a new Black nationalism is not, I don't believe, what's needed. We need a moral fusion movement as bad as we needed in the 1980s, a rainbow. So that's my comment. I've sent some information forward. It's footnoted. It's not something that just pulled out of the sky. I know I only had 15 minutes. I've overgone that, so I apologize, and would be willing anytime to come to anywhere. And I hear the call for unity, and I also say we have to be clear about what we're going to be unified around. I have no problem, and it's necessary to go after companies that are doing this with their DEI. DEI didn't, but the big case about DEI comes up in June, and I don't have time to talk about that. But I will say, anywhere at any time, emphatically, if we are not focused on challenging this budget, because inside that budget, if they cut 36 million people from Medicaid, that's 6 million Black folk. That's folk in nursing homes. That's working people. That's disabled folk. And if you go down the list of what we've sent you, you will see that that budget is the most immoral contraption of political control, only second to what they're doing with the judicial department. And we believe that, and we have to challenge it and be on it all the time. And we have to call it out from a moral perspective. We cannot merely do it from a partisan perspective.